Hi, my name is Mackenzie Maloney, and I'm from the Race and Ethnic Diversity class, and I'm going to be talking about Chapter 17, Critical Thinking Answers. And the first question is, sociologists use the term master status to describe the status that dominates others and thereby determines a person's general position in society, and to what degree can that term be applied to the three groups considered in this chapter? And I think, well, the master status of elderly people can be often labeled as sickly, slow, or unreliable. So, like, if you see them, a lot are often working at like fast food, like chain restaurants, because they weren't, when they were younger, they were able to think that they were going to work in factories for their whole life, but now the demands of being successful in America are much different than they're kind of doomed to low status jobs. But now that they're slow, sickly, and unreliable, they're not like eligible for high ranked jobs. And homosexual people are often labeled as plays promiscuous, or they're often in plays, or they're emotional. But the reason why they're in a lot of plays is because they want to take advantage of what they can, or what they're like pretty much allowed to do in colleges. So that's why you see a lot of people that are homosexual in plays, but because they're not necessarily allowed to be in like football or a different sport. And often they're called emotional. I mean, sometimes because like I know people that have been born gay, but like they might be in a male body, but they don't feel like they're men on the inside. And sometimes they can succumb to the society standard of what females should be like, which is sometimes, not all the time, why they might be portrayed as emotional. And disability people haven't really had labels like the others, but they're most likely pitied. And something I have a problem with usually, all the time actually, is when people give birth to a disabled person and they just put them in a home for the rest of their lives um, because they deserve the right to have a good life as well. And when a family only visits them one time a year in a assisted living complex, that is really detrimental to their mentality, and they have a pretty worthless life, which they're not deserving of. The second question is, the media in advertisements, humor, dramas, and situation comedies portrays life in society. What are some examples of both positive and negative of how elderly people with disabilities and gays and lesbians are presented in the media that you have seen? And I think that in the media, people that are elderly are often portrayed as sickly, slow, and unreliable, because if you watch these comedy acts, they're always like walking around crippled, but often like the reason why they're not doing well is because people that are in their 60s and 70s have been affected by Vietnam, or they had to work a lot harder, or they ate the wrong foods when they were younger and all through their life because they weren't given the right information to make a decision otherwise. People that are homosexual are presented in the media as promiscuous, emotional. They always like show videos of like, oh my god, this guy totally like cheated on my girlfriend. That's really rude because that's not who they are, and that's just how society treats them. And then people often talk about having good gaydar when truthfully there's no such thing, because if there was gaydar, then you'd be able to tell if Japanese and Chinese people are the same, because you can't really if you're not Chinese or Japanese or people of like European descent closer to like Vietnamese, Hmong, Chinese, Japanese, Thai, like all those groups. And people that have disabilities are often seen like making rude gestures like this, or like making squawking noises, but that's really extremely rude because they can't do anything, like they can't help what they're doing because there's problems with their brain because they were born that way. And we should never, ever joke about that, because they could be making fun of how we speak. How might advances in technology, including innovations for the home and computer chat rooms, have a unique effect on each of the groups trying to overcome exclusion discussed in this chapter? I think that elderly people often get framed for like being gross because they're using online chat rooms or like dating dating hotline things, or like those websites like eHarmony, like stuff like that. When in actuality, I know a lot of people who've actually gotten married from that and are very happy. I think it's a very good thing. But homosexual people can get framed from like things like eHarmony as well, because people have like big stereotypes that stuff like that is disgusting or it's rude, but yet we go out and have drink way too much and like strip and think that's a good way of finding a man when it's not at all. And for disabled people, I mean, people generally have like the stereotype that they'd never want to marry a disabled person. I mean, one is obvious because, like, one thing that would be understandable is because you can't give your whole heart to helping that person, but if you truly love a person, then you don't care if they're like hurt or if they can't do things or you have to help them. But it takes a special person, I think, to be able to do that. How do you think policymakers are trying to bring about change that we see as the half full and half empty? Either argue for change on behalf of minorities or to use the same concepts to maintain the status quo is adequate for addressing issues of social inequality? I think that, well, like one that just popped out at me, like this is the only way I really understand it, but I can't really explain it very well, is when, okay, so if one person is attempting to clear dirty dishes, then it's half full, because that's being ambitious and like actually doing something and not like grieving about it. But people, especially whites, the progress of subordinate groups or minorities make it difficult to understand calls for programs and news reforms, and impossible to understand when minority neighborhoods interrupt in violence. So I don't really know what to say about that because I'm really confused on the fact. But I think that minority groups generally have like a half-empty situation, but they might not look at it as a half-empty situation.